Hi, good evening, friends. Today, I'm trying to answer this question: what is alcoholism? Based on what I know and my experience with this disease. As is mentioned in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, I completely accept the fact that alcoholism is a threefold disease, which means the body, the mind, and there is a spiritual aspect also to this disease. Now, since this has a spiritual aspect, which we all know as addicts or alcoholics, science has not been able to figure out a solution to this problem. That's why we don't have medicines, and maybe sometime in future, science or medicine might find a solution. But as of now, we know that there is no medicine which can actually suppress the craving that an alcoholic goes through. Now, for years, I would say for centuries together, the society has been thinking that alcoholism is habitual in nature. That I have heard that throughout my life, that it's just a habit. Why don't you change the habit? But when I came into Alcoholics Anonymous and came to understand the disease, I was for the first time, I realized that alcoholism, okay, in the actual real kind, is an obsessive and a compulsive disease. So the kind of craving that an alcoholic goes through is not something that can be easily explained to a non-alcoholic. It's a very different experience. I'm sure that people who go through those kind of cravings do understand that it's difficult for them to explain what actually happens at that point in time, when they have all the resolve not to drink again, but they end up drinking. So, in short, what I would like to say is alcoholism is a disease of the mind, body, and soul. Now, I would try and explain the physical, mental, and the spiritual aspect of alcoholism. If you look at the physical aspect of alcoholism, the medical explanation that I could find is that in an alcoholic, there is a deficiency of a particular enzyme which breaks down the final particle and digests it. So, for a non-alcoholic, who they have this enzyme, and because of which, if they drink a peg in 45 minutes to an hour, if they keep that kind of a ratio, within those 45 minutes that they finish the next drink, their first drink gets completely digested. And that's why and they don't develop any sort of craving, so they drink as soon as they're high, they know they're high, and they can call it a day. Unfortunately, that's not the case with an alcoholic. In an alcoholic, the final enzyme used to digest alcohol is not produced in the body, because of which the particle, that is the residue, which has not been completely digested, is considered to be the medical reason for the craving to happen. So what I read was, what I understand is that this particular particle which remains undigested, that keeps accumulating in an alcoholic, and I'm sure that all the alcoholics know that initially for the first few drinks they don't get a high and all of a sudden they get hit. The reason is that by the time since the digestion does not get completed, they don't get the high initially, and it gets delayed because enzymes are basically catalyst, right? So you don't have the catalyst, so it takes more than 45 minutes for an alcoholic to digest that part. So that's the one part of the only medical paper that I could find which explained this aspect from a medical standpoint. Now, let's also understand that there is another physical phenomena which happens in the body of an alcoholic, which is the immense, strong feeling of craving. Now, it happens physically when an alcoholic introduces his first drink in the body. As I said, as soon as he introduces the first drink, and since he doesn't have the enzyme, there's this particular penultimate kind of a product that is formed in the body, which actually triggers a particular feeling or craving, which Dr. Silkworth has explained as the physical allergy of an alcoholic. This is the physical allergy. Hence, there is no way an alcoholic can ever drink like a normal person because of this physical limitation. Now, the other part, the second part, is the mental aspect of this disease. Now, what happens here is an alcoholic, when he has the first thought, okay, come on, let's have a drink, and that may happen any part of the day. Maybe he's in the office, he's working, and then he starts planning how to where to go and with whom to drink, and the thought has come in. And then starts a mental process of the thought getting stronger, and it then becomes an obsession. Once an obsession is created in the mind of an alcoholic, it becomes really impossible for him in his might, mentally and physically, to get over that obsession. So he ends up drinking. That's why during the early sobriety, newcomers are always told that they need to make sure that the first thought of alcohol is not played with, so that the thought does not convert into an obsession, because once it converts into an obsession, it becomes very difficult for anybody to manage that. That's the mental aspect of the disease. Now let's look at the spiritual aspect. Well, this is the most confusing part, and that's what this podcast is going to focus more on: the spiritual aspect of the disease, and more importantly, as I said in the big book, there is no recovery that can precede the spiritual recovery. So the actual recovery is in the spiritual aspect. Now let us understand what is the spiritual aspect of this disease. Well, as we commonly understand, we say that there is something called a spiritual bankruptcy. Now, spiritual bankruptcy that we normally say is those kind of activities that the alcoholic or an addict does during the times of using, where we do not consider them to be civic. The people have done a lot of things that they are very guilty about the next day, or they end up in prison, they end up in doing wrong things. So the stealing, the manipulation, everything, right? So we try to understand that as the spiritual bankruptcy part. And as a part of recovery, it is been used for more than 80 years now, and proved to be working, that you have, once you take care of the spiritual aspects of your life and you start thinking differently, wherein you stop these acts of spiritual bankruptcy in your life consciously, that's where we say the recovery happens. So, the spiritual aspect that I just described is one way of looking at it. But when I looked at it from my experience, I found that as soon as I could become spiritual, I will definitely discuss about what is being spiritual and how did I get there in my future upcoming videos. But anyway, now just to understand my experience, I would say that as soon as I had my spiritual experience, I started seeing that I was no longer able to do things which we call as character defects, right? So the character defects, as we understand, starts disappearing. But I understood, I found that to disappear in my case only and only after I had the spiritual experience. How this happens, we'll discuss that later. So once again, my final remarks on what is alcoholism. Alcoholism is a disease. It's a threefold disease: physical, mental, spiritual. Physical, no medicine available. Mental, it's an obsession, so we'll have to work on how the way we think. So that's the reason why we say alcoholism is a thinking problem, not a drinking problem. Okay, alcohol or drinking is the symptom of the disease rather than the disease itself. So there is another layer of the disease, which is a spiritual aspect of it, which again we'll discuss in details. Hence, it is very clear that alcoholism is very, very different from heavy drinking, and it is not habitual. How do we understand how can we understand what is the difference between an alcoholic and a heavy drinker? We will take that in another video. As of now, that will be all from my end. I wish you sober days. Thank you.